Hey everybody, in this video we're going to cover some useful math-related constants and methods that you may be interested in as a beginner. Then at the end of this topic, we'll cover a few exercises. Let's begin. If at any time you need the value of pi, there's a built-in constant of the math class. So I'm going to print the following. Math with a capital M dot pi, all capital. So that would give you the value 3.14 and some change. So instead of creating a variable for pi, it's always available to you within the math class. You just have to access it. There's also E. Math.capital E. This is the exponential constant, also known as Euler's number. You may never use this, but it's available to you in case you do. So again, access the math class, dot, the name of the constant. This time, let's create a double variable named result. Here's a few methods. I'm going to reassign result equal to access math dot. To raise a base to a given power, you can use the pow method. Let's raise 2 to the power of 3, then print it. Let's print.
Hey, so in this video, I'm gonna explore a part of the internet you might not have seen in a while. Call it the indie web or the small web, the yesterweb, whatever. And I'm gonna tell you about it. Why I like it, and how I think you should get involved. This is a little bit different from my usual content, so thanks for checking it out. And special thanks to my patrons for allowing me to make a video like this. For the past few months, I've spent a lot of my time in online social NFT and crypto circles. Part of this was an accident. I follow a number of artists who committed wholeheartedly. Hey, so in this video, I'm gonna explore a part of the internet you might not have seen in a while. Call it the indie web or the small web, the yesterweb, whatever. And I'm gonna tell you about it, why I like it, and how I think you should get involved. This is a little bit different from my usual content, so thanks for checking it out. And special thanks to my patrons for allowing me to make a video like this. For the past few months, I've spent a lot of my time in online social spaces in NFT and crypto circles. Part of this was an accident. I follow a number of artists who committed wholeheartedly to NFTs as a way for independent artists to make money off their work. And instead of unfollowing them, I mostly just sat and watched what they were doing and occasionally asked questions. But I also do kind of have myself to blame because the other part was sort of on purpose. As you may know, a few months ago when Neopets announced their NFTs, I made a video about it where I voiced common criticisms that other people were making and my own skepticism. What you may not know, mostly because I only mentioned it like once or twice on TikTok, was that I joined the Discord server, mostly to keep tabs on what was going on in the community. If you're unaware, there was a lot of drama revolving around this after I made my video. Pet Simmer Julie and YouTuber Izzy both made wonderful videos about it, which I recommend if you are feeling a little lost about this topic. But that's not really the point of this video. My point is to say that when you join at one NFT Discord, you tend to get a lot of invitations to other NFT Discords. Actually, if you've watched Dan Olson's amazing NFT video Line Goes Up, then you know how common an experience this is. The spamming of users in crypto Discords with invites to others. And by the way, if you haven't watched Dan's video, then I highly recommend that you do, especially if you don't know what I'm talking about NFTs and crypto. It is a really good primer on these things and how they work, or how they don't. So needless to say, for the past few months in a lot of my social spheres, I've been kind of deeply immersed in the NFT slash crypto slash so-called Web3 philosophy. And honestly, one of the reasons I stayed was because I was fascinated. I mentioned in my video about Neo NFTs that I'm somewhat sympathetic to the stated goals of a lot of people who espouse crypto and Web3 as the future.
I'm a 32-year-old person who has been dreaming of a metaverse since I was 15.
The decentralization and decorporatization of the internet, decisions made by communities and voting, artists getting paid for their work, all of these things are wonderful on paper. And if you listen to the crypto people, that's Web3, a pro-privacy, anti-corporate, democratized world where the internet widens from just being a solar system of about 10 social media giants to an entire galaxy of planets for internet users to play in. But y'all, I gotta say, after looking at it for a while, Web3 ain't it. Here's the thing you need to know about Web3. It's basically a rebranding effort. This means that if you've been paying attention to the crypto conversation for the past decade, then you actually already know what Web3 is. Though believers call it an inevitable future of the internet, what they're basically talking about is exactly what Bitcoin guys were talking about 10 years ago. Don't be fooled by their language. Web3 is not inevitable, especially when you realize that most of them can't even explain the infrastructure that they would be using to build Web3. Like, honestly, look into what they're saying, because the technology that they're talking about doesn't actually make all that much sense. Also, as an aside, take note of anyone telling you that change is inevitable in order to try and sell you something. The use of FOMO, if you don't buy in now, then you're gonna miss out, is a red flag tactic often used by scammers and con artists, and it's just good practice to be aware of when it's being used against you. And that's what most Web3 folks are doing. Selling you something. The promise of Web3 is often accompanied by the release of some new token that we promise, really pinky swear, will tie into our super cool blockchain-enabled new internet one day, you know, eventually. As Stephen Dale says in his blog post, Web3 is bullshit, it's a rhetorical trick to set up a false dichotomy between the legacy internet world of pop-up ads and Zuckerbergs, which legitimately does suck, and a fantasy world built on technologically incoherent pipe dreams and phony crypto populism. He goes on to say, it's entirely rational to want to build a more decentralized technology stack and to aspire to a more egalitarian internet, a more equitable society, and a better world. However, Web3 is not the golden path that leads us to that world. It's the same old crypto bullshit, just packaged up in a sugar pill to make it easier to digest. Okay, so what does any of this have to do with the old internet? The indie web is the small internet, off in the margins. Away from the giant social media and the same 10 apps you have installed on your smartphone, the indie web is made up of small, personal web pages all made by individuals. Instead of finding these sites on the front page of Google, because who goes down more than one page anyway after all, or having them pop up thanks to the almighty algorithm, most indie websites are discovered the old-fashioned way. That is, user exploration. So, for example, I discovered this anti-NFT page on yesterweb.org from clicking a button a pixel art site had on their main page, a site which I in turn found from the links of an unrelated dolls-centered website. The Yesterweb then led me to a web ring of old-school styled sites, a web ring being, of course, a collection of similarly themed websites all linking together in a ring, with one site linking to the next, and so on. Things like web rings, site affiliates, and top 100 page aggregators were key discoverability features of the internet of my youth, and the indie web uses them to great effect now, allowing for otherwise easily overlooked websites to be seen. There are a few more tools for navigating both the old web or the newer indie web. As I said, using sites like Google probably isn't going to net you a lot of results. Archive.org, which hosts the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, and Gift Cities, is an invaluable resource if you are interested in, for example, the archival and history of the old internet. There are a number of smaller search engines that are also a fun way of finding smaller, less SEO-friendly personal websites. Searching on these things often lead me down long, windy little rabbit holes, as most sites will then link to other sites, which will then link to other sites, and pretty soon I find myself like 12 links deep and a little unsure how I got there. And then, of course, there's NeoCities. So the real love for NeoCities happened for me while I was researching my dolls video last year. I found a couple of websites on the web host NeoCities, which I had run into a couple of times in the years before. NeoCities is, as the name suggests, something of a modern-day GeoCities. In an early tweet from the creator of the site, it was intended to be a new GeoCities with free web hosting and storage and zero censorship. It's also something of a social network. There's a dashboard, a comments system, and a tagging system that allows users with similar sites to be able to find each other. But to be honest, the social media aspect of the site really isn't the selling point. With 500,000 websites and counting, NeoCities allows for the creation and free hosting of static web pages. Static web pages, if you don't know, used to be the norm. If you ever made a website on GeoCities, Angelfire, Tripod, Xpage, or just type something up in Notepad and hosted it on the free web space your ISP gave you, then you're familiar with the concept. It means that there's no dynamic backend. You hard code the HTML and CSS, and everything that you code is what users see when they look at your website. This is important because it means that basically anybody can make a website. Yes, even you. Like, it takes a lot of time to learn, and of course you have to want to learn it, like all things, but ultimately, in the time of static web pages, any hobbyist could pick up HTML in a weekend and have a website by the end of it. At least, if this book from 1998 I picked up at a thrift store is to be believed, which it is. NeoCities is sort of meant to capture that feeling. NeoCities provides no layouts or templates or drag and drop web designers. The basic page that users start with is so simple that it actually gave me anxiety the first time that I looked at it. So much blank space. What am I gonna fill it with? What should you fill it with? Because here's the thing, I think you should make a personal website. So there's a page on yesterweb.org filled with manifestos, pages written by those building a space for themselves on the internet about their motivations for doing so. Everyone comes to this space on a different path, but a lot of them value similar things. A free and equal space where people and communities are more important than algorithms and search engine optimization, privacy and freedom of expression, especially for marginalized groups, a creative playground where the act of building something just for you or your community is more important than how monetizable it ends up being. If any of these things spoke to you, then I highly recommend that you go out and visit the collection of manifestos, which I have linked in the description. I started my NeoCities site in February. Considering how long I've had it, it's honestly pretty small, but I've had a blast making it. I started out with a layout designed by another user, sadness here, but I've recently begun coding my own layouts from scratch, such as this page where I keep my adoptable and virtual pets. This is a preview, by the way. This has not been published to the web yet. So the point of this is not to tell you what you should put on your website. The idea of a personal site is to make it personal. Put whatever you want on it. I will say I find freedom in throwing out the idea of content. of branding, of making myself a packaged and sellable commodity for others to view and consider. I do that pretty much everywhere else online, here on YouTube, for example, or on TikTok or on Twitter, where my thoughts and ideas are creations that are meant for other people to consume. So all that to say, while I do have some things on my site that I've made for others, like these graphics and this quiz mostly, my favorite things on any given site usually aren't in the sections labeled for you, but are the sections all about the webmaster and their particular interests. For example, some things that I've seen that I really enjoy. I really like blogs. I like sections about dreams. I'm working on one for my site right now, actually. Collections of cute pixel art or quiz results or blinkies that describe the user in question. I'm a huge fan of shrines, pages for folks to geek out about something that they like. These can just be a collection of graphics or other media, but they can also go deeper, explaining the history of something or explaining why the user who made the page loved it so much. A lot of modern shrines are of older properties, which makes sense given the indie web's general obsession with nostalgia, but I also really like the shrines that feature more recent TV shows, actors, K-pop idols, whatever, because I actually think that this is something that's important. As much as the small web looks back for inspiration, ultimately what we want is to move forward. And that might be one of my favorite things about the small web. It's forward thinking. It's often pro-worker and collective action. It values decommodifying your online presence, at least a little. And it is so queer. Like, it's super gay, super trans. Super good. The indie web also questions tech solutionism, which often attempts to solve human problems by removing the human element. But easily the most remarkable and powerful thing about the internet is the ability it has to connect us with one another. Prodigy was an internet service of the 1980s and 90s. In those days, the web was still rough and somewhat difficult to use, and providers like Prodigy and AOL created easy-to-use graphical-based clients. They weren't quite the true internet as hardcore web users saw it. Instead, they were considered more like walled gardens, curated specifically for the more casual computer user tastes. Prodigy users, for example, had an original content portal with news, weather, Zagat surveys, consumer reports, and more all at their fingertips. But in the early 90s, Prodigy had a problem. A partnership between IBM and Sears, Prodigy had expected its user base to use many of its platform's features, including email, to do online shopping. However, it turned out that's not really what users were doing. Instead of emailing with shops and using it for commerce, users were primarily using the system to send mail to each other. Same with the message boards, which, in spite of heavy moderation and censorship, were getting much more traffic than Prodigy initially predicted. These two systems were getting so much use, in fact, that Prodigy was losing money, and they needed to do something about it. In 1991, they limited the number of free emails basic users were allowed to send a month down to 30. An additional fee of 25 cents could be paid for each email exceeding that number. This was super unpopular. A later change 2 years later also added a fee for the use of message boards, a change which so enraged the user base that tens of thousands of people canceled their subscriptions in protest, leading Prodigy to walk back both of these new fees. I've always really liked this story because I think it highlights the difference between the way that tech people want folks to use the internet and the way that we actually use it. There was a time when humans were deciding the way that these tools should be used, not the tech companies themselves. And that's not to say that this isn't something that people still do today. I mean, I think there's a reason that we're fascinated with stories about K-pop stans using collective action to overload an unguarded GOP web form, or when a bunch of people decide to use microform content like TikTok to make an entire musical based on a Disney property. But the power that tech has, the amount of real estate that it holds online, the convenience of it existing, does make it a lot harder to push back against now. I think about those Prodigy users who, when they stepped away from their accounts, maybe never knew if they were going to be talking to their other Prodigy using friends ever again. I mean, they were risking that, but they also knew that the ability to talk to these people was worth fighting for, which meant that it was worth risking. The power of the internet has always been in its ability to connect us to others. Now, in the days of outrage posting and hot takes, of course, being around other people might seem like more of a bug than a feature, and maybe it is. For all the good that social media has brought, the ability to quickly organize and get your message out there, to react in real time to your favorite teen drama on Sunday night with thousands of other people, to hear people speaking, their experience from thousands of miles away. In spite of all that good, I also get why we're tired. Especially over the last couple of years, we are more isolated than we've ever been, and yet here we are having to shout to be heard over the din of hundreds of people that we didn't ask to see or hear, fed to us by likes and shares and an algorithm more interested in keeping us on the website than keeping us informed or happy. You can curate your Twitter or TikTok or YouTube feed to a certain extent, but where can you go if you just want a space that's quiet? It's no wonder the idea of having a space to ourselves appeals to so many people. These people who have run off to a little corner of the internet and decided, these are the people that I want to associate with, and only them. I decide when I see them. I decide when I interact with them. I get why that works. So what can you do? If any of this spoke to you, if this seemed like a lot of fun, I really highly recommend making a website. Over the next few weeks and
Are you looking to host your project on GitHub Pages but aren't quite sure where to start? No worries. In this video, I'm going to show you everything that you need to know so that you can start working with GitHub Pages and hosting your projects today. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Common Coder. My name is Josh, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you everything that you need to know to start working with GitHub Pages. So the first thing that we need to do is talk about what GitHub Pages actually is. So GitHub Pages is a static site hosting service that is available from GitHub. So static site, essentially in this context, means that there's no server-side rendering. So we're not going to be using frameworks like Ruby on Rails or ASP.NET Core. It's just going to be static client sites. These can be just HTML files, or it can be even generated by a modern framework as long as it's gone through a build step, or you set up a build pipeline using GitHub Actions. Going through these bullet points, like I said, there's no application server. So again, just static sites here, front-end clients only, so we're mainly working with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You can connect to other APIs, if you're using JavaScript to reach out to other sources to power your site or do interactions on your site, but GitHub Pages cannot host the server directly, so that's the biggest difference here. Like I mentioned, we can use front-end frameworks like Angular, React, Vue, etc., but we either need to commit the compiled output into GitHub or utilize a build step through GitHub Actions. So that build step through GitHub Actions is out of scope for this video, but if you're comfortable working with something like React or Angular and you've gone through the build process using the build script inside of your project, you can host that output inside of GitHub Pages with no problem. Now, GitHub Pages allows you to have one main site per account. So basically for your GitHub account, you can have one main site that represents you, and that's going to be at whatever your GitHub username is, .github.io. And then from there, you can have unlimited project sites. And so for each repository can essentially be its own hosted site if it is a project that outputs CSS, HTML, and JavaScript in some way. And so those will typically have the form of GitHub username.github.io / whatever your project name is. And the project name is derived from your repository name. All right, so now that we've got some of the prerequisites out of the way, let's go ahead and see how we can host our site using GitHub Pages. All right, so on my screen here, I have a demo project that I created that's basically just an HTML file, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file. So this is basically just a static website. The index page here is what's going to be loaded when the user navigates to this GitHub Pages URL. And so let's go ahead and see how we can get this project up onto GitHub Pages. So inside of the repository up here on the top navigation bar, we should have a tab over here on the right hand side called Settings. So if we click this, on the left sidebar here, if we scroll down about halfway, we can see there's a section here that says Pages. We can go ahead and click that. And this is how we can deploy our site to GitHub Pages. Now, behind the scenes, it's actually just using GitHub Actions to do the deployment, but there is a server that is hosting these files. So what we want to do is go ahead and deploy from a branch. Now in our project, we only have a main branch, so we're going to go ahead and deploy from main, and then we're going to deploy from the root folder. We're going to go ahead and leave it on root because we only have our main root folder with an index in there. That's what we want to go ahead and serve when the page loads up. If we scroll down a little bit more, there's a spot for a custom domain. So if you own a domain and you want to point that to your GitHub project using GitHub Pages, you can totally do that. All right, so what we're going to want to do here in order to kick off the build is go ahead and switch this main branch to none and go ahead and click save. And then once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and switch it back to main and then click save again. And then that should kick off a build. So if we go into the actions tab up here on the top, go ahead and click on actions, we can see that there is a pages build and deployment kicked off by me, the common coder. And so as soon as this is done, we should be able to see our site in GitHub Pages. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it here on the actions tab so we can see this workflow run. And this should refresh automatically, but if you don't see this green check mark show up in a little bit of time, just go ahead and refresh and see if it updates after you click refresh. But you can see here that we have a green check mark, which means that my build was successful. So if I go back into the settings tab, click on the pages tab in the sidebar, you can see that it has added this section up here at the top that it says my site is live at thecommoncoder.github.io/my project name, which is GitHub Pages Demo. So if I click on visit site here, you can see that it loads up my page, which is just a simple site. I'll go ahead and make this a little bit bigger. This says hello world. This page is hosted using GitHub Pages. We can see that here in the URL up here at the top, and it's dynamic too. So I'm using JavaScript on this page to dynamically add this little bit of text. So if I refresh this, we can see this here. It's not there, and then it appears after a certain amount of time. And so this is how you use GitHub Pages. So when you first navigate to the Pages tab, if you've never done a Pages deployment before, we need to either switch this from none to main, and that will basically kick off the build and make sure we select our folder. If we're on main and the folder's already there, we need to go ahead and select none, basically to take us off the branch, and then select our main branch again, so that way it picks up the deployment and automatically deploys to GitHub Pages. And what's cool now is if I make a change to this, it will automatically redeploy my site for me. So for example, let's go ahead and go into VS Code, and I have this GitHub Pages demo here. I'm going to go ahead and click into my index.html, and maybe instead of a period, I want an exclamation point here because it's exciting that we're deploying from GitHub Pages. So I'm going to go ahead and add that exclamation point using Visual Studio Code's source control panel. I'm going to go ahead and commit this change. So we'll just say add exclamation point. I'm going to go ahead and stage the file and then click commit, and then push these up to GitHub by clicking this sync changes button. All right, and so once I push that change, if we go into the actions tab, you can see that GitHub recognizes that change and then it kicks off another build. Okay, so depending on how you have your project set up, maybe you're deploying from a branch or maybe you're deploying from main, each time that GitHub recognizes there's been a change to that branch, it's going to automatically build and redeploy your site to GitHub Pages. You can see that that second build was successful. So if I jump back over to my demo project that's being hosted on GitHub Pages, if I refresh this, there is my exclamation point. You can see that it's also still dynamic. All right, and so that is going to do it for this GitHub Pages demo. Thank you so much for coding along with me today. If you liked this video and found this information valuable, please give me a like down below, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing. We're going to be learning a lot more about Git, GitHub, GitHub Pages, web development, and pretty much everything in between. So if that's what you're into, I'd really love to have you along for the journey. So until next time, be sure to stay curious, never stop learning, and I will see you all in the next video.